What's up everyone, this is your Frened and I am back with a new fanfic part 2. The fanfic title is What If Konan Died Then Reincarnated into a New World part 2. I hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you enjoy this, so don't forget to subscribe my channel Anime Hub 1.2. Now let's start the fanfic. Konan raced through the trees on her way out of town, moving quieter than seemed possible despite the fact that she ran along the ground. She'd kept them waiting long enough. Several times she was able to refocus for half a minute, perhaps a minute at most, and remind herself that she had to give Sasori time. It occurred to her that it had been a very bad idea to save the one who would be most difficult to convince and likely require the most time for last. Well, too late for that now. If she could convince everyone else, that might do even if he wasn't there for tonight's show. Speaking of, much as she wanted to be gentle, Konan was well aware that she was aiming to destroy their whole idea of the world they thought they had always lived in. That could not be gentle, or it would fail. Only something concrete would do. Something as hard as concrete, as undeniable, as absolutely wrecking in its power. I almost feel bad for them. She turned left on the road that she knew had patchy yellow lines on it, though it was too dark to see them at night. The beginning had been planned all along by some part of her she didn't interfere with and readily came to her mind as soon as she called for it. However, nothing else was in place. A devastating blow. Then what? What would she say? No, the question was not what she would say. She only meant to tell them the truth, after all. The question was, how would she say it? The ordering of the several things she had to tell them, the phrasing, how to respond to inevitable disbelief, all were the things he would need to know. Her heart beat faster as she neared the building. It seemed to beat only one word, a word she definitely did not want to hear. A plan could be restructured, even one for which there would be no second chance like this one. At the very least, if she had a plan and it failed, she could look at the plan, see where it failed, and add it to her collection of experience. The word that she could not help thinking of required something else, a display of herself in her entirety. If it failed, her entire collection of experience and everything she was would fail as well. Her palms sweated. She dried them on her cloak as she slowed to a walk and tried to become more urged. Her heart continued beating away. Improv, 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 improv. Konan strained to keep her face flat as she opened the door. The sound of laughter greeted her as she walked down the hall. You know, if they weren't all holes, I'd call you a Disney prince. Hidan. I suppose you still could. It doesn't occur to me to think of actual princes from Disney. I thought of the meaning you meant before that one. Does anyone agree? Nagato. I did as well. But isn't it a little undignified? Kakuzu, with a hint of humor on the last word. I am not the guy equivalent of a Disney princess. Yahiko. She could almost hear the blush. A Disney princess is a character type defined by having a strong relationship with animals, to the point of calming normally dangerous ones. Being able to command smaller creatures. If you could figure out a way to command these moths, it wouldn't be anything to be embered about. Itachi. Itachi's right, nothing useful can be embering. Next time we meet a large dog, maybe see if you can calm it. That'd be useful and nothing to be embered over, right? Nagato again. The only thing worse than being called a princess is having you guys talking about my feelings. I don't need comforting. Yahiko wasn't taking this well. Although she was only listening from outside the kitchen door, the conversation soothed Konan's nerves. Pulling off the ludicrous through 95% improvisation was a thing to be nervous about. Rescuing Yahiko from awkwardness. Perfectly natural, just as it had been for Nagato. She reached again down to that strange well of confidence, wincing as a memory came up of the momentary glance she'd gotten of the pain and nothingness hiding behind everything. Come to think of it, the strange burning confidence felt just like a lesser version of the burning pain. Well, that made sense, but she pushed her thoughts in that direction away. Consider later. Do now. It felt good. Hey, Konan's back. Hidan yelled, before she'd moved a muscle. What the hell? How? Thankfully her legs were farther away from her ears than her brain was, so they initiated action unaffected by Hidan's exclamation. Konan walked into the room with the counters just in time to witness the strange break in between scenes where everyone rushed to take new places. Yahiko attempted to look nonchalant against the counters in the back. Nagato attempted to join him, but was held back by Hidan's arm slung around his shoulder. With a slight blush he elbowed Hidan in the ribs, causing him to finally realize that his arm was no longer welcome. Kakuzu and Kisame stood together in the near corner to her right, leaning against the wall and cabinets. They moved slightly apart, Kisame drifting closer to Itachi who was sitting on a cabinet as Hidan put on his best offended face and went to sulk next to Kakuzu. They and the gap left between Itachi and Nagato took up the back and right sides, so she moved to the left naturally and smoothly. This instinctive movement reminded her of scattering civilians. They may have the memories of civilians, but they shouldn't have the instincts. Well, at least they may get along better than my old Akatsuki did. They looked at her, each with a different expression. She looked at each of them, wondering. Something was wrong. She considered briefly, then sent a nervous signal that would tell her mouth to open and begin. Just as the signal reached its destination, a sputtering noise from outside interrupted, and they all turned their eyes reflexively to look out the door she'd just come through. Konan almost started at the new sound. It was unlike anything she'd heard yet. The rough sound continued as if something with a very deep voice was coughing very regularly, then stopped. Kisami's mouth dropped open. What the hell did this lady promise him? Itachi was suitably impressed. Kakuzu didn't know the owner of that ride, but he knew who usually came along and groaned inside. He'd been fine for a while, but now he was getting tired, and if that brat is loudmouthed tonight I might just choke him to death. Two's a crowd. The sound of two sets of footsteps echoed into the room. Neither set sounded quite right. The reason for that was obvious as Deidara came into view, followed by Sasori. Deidara's footfalls were a little uneven as he rubbed traces of sleepiness out of his eyes still, and he refused to let go of Sasori's arm, leaving his friend to correct his balance with just one. After taking another quick swipe, Deidara blinked to clear his eyes and looked around. Sasori now stood upright and informed Kisame and Itachi with a shake of his head and a motion of his hand that not my idea. See this? I was dragged. Don't blame me for getting caught in this foolishness. Deidara locked eyes with the stiff-backed woman in front of him. She didn't look surprised that he and Sasori were here. The look in her eyes caused him to reflexively adjust his posture. He hadn't seen that look in its entirety for a long time. Deidara realized he was still holding Sasori's arm, and let go apologetically. In the flesh, she looked just like Sasori had described. Deidara didn't know whether to be at attention before her or relaxed. He settled for holding her gaze, even under the weight of her scrutiny. He tried to imitate the look of detached strength before him and failed, miserably. Perhaps he could have managed it before, but not now. Not so many months later. Even then, you have to earn the power to look at someone like that, yeah. I still couldn't, Konan was surprised. She hadn't noticed before, but suddenly all the other Akatsuki members stood out in sharp relief. Of everyone she had seen, Deidara looked the most like the shinobi she was used to seeing. It had to be something in the way he stood, the way he looked. She did not turn her head to look back, but nonetheless could clearly see the others in her mind's eye. Relaxed, wary, all kinds of things, but all the things they were, all the ways they had of doing things, all were summed up now in one word. Civilian. Or, perhaps, no, something else was true. She would have immediately seen that. Something else had obscured her vision. Only mostly civilian, then. But how can that be possible? Deidara was the lone exception. She recognized his old self in him immediately. Several seconds had passed since he'd looked at her, so with an inner smile Konan broke off the connection and turned her head, implicitly ordering him to the space between Nagato and Itachi. Deidara proceeded without dithering, and after looking between them and wondering what had happened Sasori followed. Konan realized at that moment, just before Sasori turned back to lean against a patch of wall, that it was Sledja. Amur time. Upon turning back, Sasori froze like everyone else already had at the smile she now had on her face. That was not a polite smile. She locked eyes with him. They sparkled maliciously. She locked eyes with Didera. He wondered just how many people she'd sent off to die before. She locked eyes with Hidan. He swooned. Then she raised her hands. Her outer garments exploded, and from them flew paper. The rippling sound briefly reminded some of a crashing wave. Crash it did, sheets of paper flying everywhere around them. A small burst of wind ruffled hair on everyone's head as the sheets of razor-sharp white blinded and surrounded them, forming into a paper blizzard. It was impossible to see where a sheet ended and another began, their borders folded together and blurred with motion. They simply swarmed, their edges making a terrific rustling that blotted out any other sounds there may have been, trapping them far away from the world. No one knew how long this continued before one by one they began to notice a steadily rising noise against the background slicing of the air. It was rhythmic, gentler, the sound of paper against paper. One by one butterflies rose into the air, each rising like a mirage before darting suddenly into their victims. This dart stopped at the last second, and they flapped slowly and leisurely upward again. Some of them accidentally looked at a downward angle during their mindless twisting and saw that much of the seemingly endless paper had settled to the floor and was folding itself in a synchrony. Z rhythm. The blizzard became more complicated in its motion as each sheet of paper was reincarnated with surprising speed into a butterfly that rose to flap its wings in motion around the room. Yahiko was the first to truly take the blow, when a butterfly fluttered softly out of the fracas like a dream. It danced before his uncomprehending gaze before slowly, softly, just barely touching the centerfold of its butterfly body to his nose. His mouth began to work up and down soundlessly, calling in other butterflies to brush their wings against him. By the feel of it several settled in his hair. The first one to brush his ear made him blink and make a sound. It was an incoherent squeak. Hidan was much more coherent when one of the butterflies in front of him made a sudden jerk in just the right way. In a flash his hand lashed out and batted it from the air. It did not fall, but before it could rejoin the swirling chaos it was snatched and held in a loose grip of his fingers. Operating on instinct, he brought it to his face and sniffed it. The blizzard closed in, the butterflies tightening their flight paths until it was impossible not to crash. Crash they did, bouncing off the outer garments, hair, and skin of the people standing in shock until they too began to reach out and interact. As they reached, each and every butterfly was suddenly pulled away from them and drawn up toward the ceiling, till all the blizzard was gathered under the gray tiles. With various exclamations, and one gleeful giggle, all noticed Konan was no longer there in the same space of a moment and a half. Then the blizzard came back down, flooding the room again, except in the few moments they had looked elsewhere each butterfly had unfolded into a plain sheet of paper, not a crease to be seen on any one of them. A whirling cyclone descended then inverted itself, forming into an upside-down funnel wider at the base than at the top with the base several feet off the floor. The paper either ceased to exist or changed color, no one could be sure, until a black shape with red clouds on it appeared in the air. The last few sheets of paper completed the shape by splitting into two streams and being absorbed through the back, briefly creating the illusion of wings being reabsorbed. Then the fluttering sound stopped entirely, and only Konan was left. She hovered in the air, her hands still raised and put together in that sign they had seen before, and gently came back down. Her eyes looked down on them and did not move from their faces. As she spread her legs somewhat and landed gently, her cloak billowed around her. The air was greatly changed. Nobody moved. Hidan threatened to fall down under the force of everyone else's not moving. Some of them moved their mouths, but could not yet say anything. What could be said, after all those ghostly little jarring impacts? Konan smiled sweetly, and undid the seal. A few of them noticed the change in the air around her, but were unable to put a name to what they felt. They'd learn soon enough. Folding her arms across her chest, the kunoichi stepped forward. Some of them flinched back. That was unreal, she said, taking the words right out of their minds. Impossible. It cannot happen in this world. I do not deny it, that was. I broke the rules of this world. But, she smiled, and her eyes flared with triumph, I did not obey the rules of this world in the first place. How could I? It is not my world. She swept her arm out to indicate everything. None of this, not a single particle, belongs to the world I belong to. I am here not of my own decision or will, but because I have died, and whatever may be in charge of our worlds has declared this to be my next one. The world I am from has very different rules. By its rules, I am not unique, and this is perfectly real. The technique I just used was a form of ninjutsu, created by manipulating the chakra inside my body in a specific way, aided by hand seals. That basic principle is common, absurdly so. Unless one has a very rare defect that prevents them from manipulating their chakra, anyone could use hand seals to perform jutsus if they had the chakra and training. That paper jutsu is mine, and mine alone. But there are many others, too many to list the names of even in a very thick book. That's where all of you come in. Quote, she swept her gaze across the pale, enraptured faces of the men gathered before her. Have any of you come to wonder over the past few months why it is that everything in you seems unreal? Why somehow, for no reason you can remember, you are fundamentally misaligned with the world around you? Why you have never felt so misaligned before? You may have come up with any number of incorrect ideas, failed to come up with anything at all, or perhaps stumbled upon the correct reason but dismissed it. Regardless, the truth is the same. Just as I am not a person of this world, neither are you. She paused for a moment to let the impact wash over them. Oddly enough, most of them showed no reaction beyond some very subtle changes in the way they looked at her. Sasori looked about to say something, but Deidara's hands involuntarily began to clench within his field of view, so he said nothing. Nagato looked as if he was going to be the first to recover his wits, so Konan moved on. The memories you have of always having belonged here, always having been a person belonging to this world, those are false memories. In reality, the past months you have spent in bewilderment are the only months you have spent in this world. In reality, something led her to pause for a moment there. She tried to continue speaking, but gave up on that effort as useless in a split second. Something was wrong. Something is quite wrong. What is it? What is it that has? Her gaze landed on Sasori, and she clearly saw him for the first time. Under the dim moonlight, she couldn't have been sure. Before, there had been Deidara to look at. But now, the changes to his face were definitely there, not a trick of the moonlight. Eyes a little smaller in proportion, mouth a little bigger, not so round. His hairline was a little higher. He was as tall as Deidara. A dozen little adjustments, adding up to changed. There is change. Difference. Her tongue was released. Thanks to the speed at which a trained strategy planning nin thought, it sounded as if she'd merely paused for effect when she continued, those months are the only months you have spent in existence. I died. Now I am here. I remember. I know all of you. All of you come from the people I knew and worked with, until each of your original selves died. Sasori was first. Kisame, I had not even heard the news of. He must have been most recent. Only force of habit kept her going with the same tone of voice and same facial expression as before. Yet there seems to be some inheritance. It is possible to detect subtle changes in chakra with enough training. I detected such changes from Sasori earlier, which proves that he does have chakra and should be able to use jutsu, even if that is not in accordance with the rules of this world. Some of you have physical features that alone prove this world's rules no longer apply. Each of your personalities is recognizable, even if only on a basic level. Each of your originals had their own unique abilities, techniques they were very skilled in. Those too may have been inherited. Quote, that last sentence had almost broken her force of habit, revealed her shock. She could not be certain that Urshan was true. If there had been more than one such sentence trickling up to her throat, it might have spelled disaster. We were an organization. The Akatsuki. Perhaps, to find out what has happened, we could be again. The room was dead silent. The stream of words was gone. Konan continued to stare into their faces, but saw nothing. Her own horror fogged her vision. They stared back, their own horror fogging their vision. It was as if a jutsu had been cast to sever the connection between their senses and their mind, rendering almost everyone in the room insensate. There was only one person in the room who was not so crippled, who still had a working sense. Even though this sense detected nothing more than horror and shock, its detection of anything spurred the rest of the mind to activity. Sluggishly, the brain churned out a thought. Everyone feels the same. There is no feeling of not being, like this. So, this thought did more to wake him up than an intravenous line of caffeine. His eyes focused and recognized that her eyes looked kinda withdrawn. Then his eyes glazed over again, because the jolt ped quickly and everyone was kinda withdrawn. Fighting against the paralytics creeping down the line and directly into the wiring of his brain, he managed one last thing. Everyone twitched when the silence was broken. Konan's lower workings of her brain started quickly enough to suppress it, and she hurriedly searched for something to say. Ninjas. Swallowing, she continued. People who can use ninjutsu and keep themselves and others alive in battle are called ninjas. The more formal title is shinobi. A female shinobi is called a kunoichi. The military forces of OU My World are composed of shinobi. As are the truly high CL mercenaries. She shut her mouth before she could say which one they had been. The people I knew wouldn't care. But who are they? Sasori was chalk white and struggling to keep from laughing. Oh God, oh sweet baby Jesus, I said it was a paranormal mystery novel. Holy crap, was I too close to normal? This is more like. The urge to laugh subsided as he fell into the serious business of determining exactly which genre they were in. Deidara found himself sucking his thumbs nervously. That was actually quite painful considering the thumb was never supposed to bend that far into the palm. He stopped. Flexed his thumbs experimentally. Ow. How long have I been doing this for? Probably ever since she said that thing, actually. Never mind. And started sucking on his first 2 fingers on each hand just to ensure his thumbs wouldn't be disabled if this lady had anything more to say. Kakuzu shook his head slightly, and threw up some emergency denial. What the is this stranger saying? That I've only been alive for a few months. That we're all not real people. How the hell could she know anything of the sort? Kakuzu was not alone in thinking this. Kisame was thinking and doing the exact same thing. Nagato and Yahiko felt certain that they had to be real. How could Jiraiya or their parents' deaths or any of that not be real? And Itachi was blue-screened at the thought that he was dead. Hidan raised his hand. Hey, goddess lady. Her defenses lapsed. Konan replied impulsively. The people of the Rain Village called me their angel, actually. What is it? Hidan remembered the paper wings he'd briefly imagined and filed that away for later. Are you saying we're all ninjas with magic powers? Her memory twanged like an overstretched rubber band as Konan remembered her original plan that she'd walked in here planning to get them to agree to. It hurt. I really have no idea what I'm doing. I didn't even figure out, until, yes. Hidan contemplated for a few seconds, then paused his contemplation. Closing his eyes firmly, he reached inside and allowed everything to vanish, losing focus until the feelings disappeared somewhere. Much better. Although it disrupted his ability to think and remember, he continued to allow himself to be capable of this. Then he resumed contemplating. If he'd been an analytic type, it wouldn't have taken any contemplating time at all since he really didn't have much to think about. Any requirements to join. Everyone in the room, formerly engrossed in their individual reactions to Conan's information, now turned to look at him. Their reactions varied through several shades of disbelief, wonder, pity, and a bunch of other things. Many, especially those who had thrown up some emergency denial as cover, became angry as they remembered Conan's proposal. What does she think she's asking, and who does she think she is to demand it? Even so, they waited for an answer. Konan was the only one in the room to not react very much to Hidan's question. She looked at him with her flat face on, not feeling anything that Hidan could detect, and replied. Requirements. Yeah, do we get a group uniform or anything? There was no change in Konan, although she did make an effort to move her face more as she spoke. What do you think I'm wearing? Gasp. Hidan's mouth fell open as he vividly pictured himself wearing a cloak similar to the one she wore. So bad. I would look so good in that. I would sell my soul for this opportunity. Without even needing to think about it, he followed up with, any special gear? At this a ripple of pain ped through her, and her flat face turned translucent, allowing some feeling to show through. With a look of sadness that reminded Nagato of why he and Yahiko had come, she spoke slowly. Your original had a special weapon, yes. As did Kisame. Your original wielded a scythe as tall or taller than himself, with 3 red blades. Kisami's used a special sword called the Samahata. Samahata was alive, cut enemies with large razor-sharp scales, and 8 chakra. Nobody else used any unique weapons as far as I know. The emergency shield of denial fractured into a GL mist instantly as Kisame froze. Samahata. How? How does this lady know about Samahata? Wait. Samahata's not a sword, but she knows Samahata's alive. Eats chakra. Kisami's right arm remembered the feeling of tooth marks in it. Fish. Shredded. Never eaten. Oh my god. His vision swam before him, rearranging itself into a scene crystal clear yet unfamiliar. She's telling the truth. Hidan made a series of warbling chirping, squeaking, squealing noises that rose up and down a full scale, conveying joy. He could not help bobbing his entire body up and down and shaking his fists held tightly in front of him as he did so. The pain lifted from Konan as she watched him, no longer reminded of his own original but of another, completely different man that she did not feel bad about in the slightest. That's so Toby-ish. He settled and, still giggling, turned to Kakuzu with eyes wide open and lit up like a bonfire. Waste of money my. Even if I didn't love that thing, it's still, I don't know. In your face. I get a bad cloak and the coolest weapon that's ever existed. Is this or is this not the greatest thing ever? Kakuzu stared at him in angry bafflement. You're going to do this. You're going to spend time with the disturbed lunatic who says we're all dead and everything we know is part of a multidimensional conspiracy to do who knows what just so you can get the chance to play ninja, pretend you can do magic, and dress up. He looked very pissed, and everyone in the room wondered if this was what Konan had been talking about when she said they could detect chakra distu. Bants. His voice continued rising in volume and lowering in pitch as he went on. All this just because you like the look of obvious insanity and apparently have a death wish. By now Kakuzu's voice had deepened too much for him to sustain any volume, so the next growl was little more than a wisp. You, Hidan, are the largest idiot I have ever had the misfortune of meeting. Hidan looked at him quizzically, scratching his head. Once again he could have been overwhelmed by it, his own feelings drowned in Kakuzu's anger. Fortunately, his own joy was great enough to counteract it. Kakuzu, he found a very nice spot near his ear to scratch at and did so until sufficiently poetic words flowed out. And the fortune too, right? Kakuzu narrowed his eyes and glared. Hidan grinned like a sunrise, a surprisingly sweet sight that he'd literally never presented to the world before. Kakuzu was surprised out of his anger for just a moment. A moment was all that Hidan needed. You wouldn't want to be bored, would ya? You wouldn't want to be only partial, would ya? You are, Kakuzu. You're partial. You'd never do anything except beat people at gambling, get angry sometimes, and sit there with your money if I wasn't around. That's still most of what you do even with me around, except since I am around, you can take occasional breaks from being just that shit. A light flashed somewhere. His smile dropped into a questioning look. I wonder if, maybe, other you was more complete, or at least if there's reasons why you don't do very much. I mean, why are you, What the hell are you, anyway? If we're supposed to be ninjas, and we've got all these ninja things, and we don't do anything with them, then, if these ninja things are us, or parts of us then we're, partial. Because, those things are just gathering dust somewhere and they're missing. Hidan had started scratching as soon as the words ran out, but no more were coming. He looked around for inspiration. His eyes settled on Konan. Just look at her. A lot of weirdness, yeah. But I bet she knows where the weirdness came from, and what it does, and what she can use it for. You don't know any of that shit. What good are your stitches? Where did they come from? What are you really able to do? Where did your money fetish and stitches and like everything else, where'd you come from? I'd like to know. Not you. I wouldn't be able to know where you came from. Me. Like where'd my scythe come from, and all that shit. Hidan looked hopefully in Conan's direction. I wonder if I could maybe hang out with me someday. Would he be cool? Would we be different? How much have I been doing by myself in the past months, anyway? Wait. Ah shit, I confused myself. What's going on? While Hidan tried to piece together the tracks of his train of thought, which was a hopeless effort. Many of them had been stolen even before the explosion, and the most recent disappeared down a yawning canyon. Everyone else except Konan felt a little ping inside. At what part? None could have said. Konan felt several parts of her freeze back over as she tried to answer the question. If you could, of course. Of course you would. I'm sure that a dedicated, loyal predator would be very cool. All at once the urge to just get everyone else away sprang up, against which she was powerless. Her hands tightened into fists. A direct line was established to her eyes, which flared. I will be in the front lobby. Any questions the others may have started to come up with were silenced at the scorching brand in her eyes. The air turned razor sharp and everyone was suddenly afraid to move. It returned to normal within the space of a second as she left, almost too quickly to track with the eye. Hidan abandoned his efforts and put his priorities back in order. In accordance with them, he raced out of the room not 2 seconds after her but turned in the opposite direction. Having explored the building thoroughly earlier, he raced to a room with a large enough window, opened it, jumped out, and took off into the woods. All this in just over 5 seconds. Yahiko and Nagato shared a look. She doesn't look like she likes this any more than we do. With a sympathetic look on Yahiko's face at the thought of her situation and a nod from Nagato, they understood what they had to do. Deidara snuck a look at the palms of his hands. How much of me does she understand? Maybe she can tell me about these too, huh? Sasori didn't tell me anything else, just that she looked ex-military, yeah. I never actually let him say anything else. Who the hell cares? It's Christmas, yeah, March 20th, actually, but Christmas anyway. Sasori had not the slightest idea what genre he was in. He decided to give up on finding out and just go with what he wanted to do. What do I want to do? He turned to his right and saw Deidara beginning to smile and looking at his hands, which were smiling too. Oh, of course. There was no choice to make after that. Itachi had often wondered about himself. Who and what am I? Where do I belong? There was no choice to make. Kisame was still frozen. She was right about Samahata. Everything she said. Wait, no. Click fallacy. Just because she was right about Samahata doesn't mean she's right about everything else. Even so, the curiosity that had inspired him to stay in the first place sparked again. How much else is she right about? Kakuzu didn't have any idea what to think. Damn you, Hidan. More than anything else, he felt uncomfortable. Everything seemed to make perfect sense in his memory. All of it was internally consistent. And yet, when each part of it was tied to the present, it fell apart somehow. Like Hidan had pointed out earlier, the cause he remembered for his stitches didn't hold up compared to their current appearance. A lot of things didn't. Almost everything, actually. Everything suddenly seemed uncomfortable, not suited to him. I didn't need to hear anything she said. I didn't want to. Why did I even agree to this? The answer was quite simple. He'd agreed because Hidan had made him agree, because the little dipshit needed someone to look out for him. Stupid kid was going to get himself killed with a smile on his face before too much longer. Kakuzu had no idea how he'd even ended up in this position. He'd never made a decision to look after the kid beyond the first couple days. Yet somehow Hidan just kept showing up, forcing him into new and uncomfortable situations. Situations that Kakuzu refused to even think about, lest he inadvertently admit he enjoyed them. Without making a decision was made. Yahiko and Nagato went first. As they entered the lobby, Konan was sitting on the front desk staring out into the darkness beyond the large windows. Nagato wondered what she was keeping watch for. They stopped beside her, both struggling to think of what to say. They'd thought whatever had been bothering her earlier could be helped by their efforts, but with a low iron-like voice, she interrupted their considerations. Nagato, Yahiko, your originals specialized in jutsu, Nagato's in an impossibly wide variety, Yahiko in water style. I knew their techniques well. It would not be difficult to show you, if her posture softened, and both of them saw that she seemed to want them to join her. They shared a look. Yahiko was willing to do anything to help, and he didn't mind making friends along the way. It occurred to Nagato that this was the golden opportunity he had been looking for, handed to him on a silver platter. A way to stay near Yahiko as he wanted yet also forge other connections, distance himself as he also wanted. They turned back. So, see you, here. Will this be our place if anyone else joins? Yahiko asked. Konan considered. Eventually she said, cautiously, I'm not sure what you mean by our place. Of course you will be fully allowed to continue whatever lives you have, outside of the Akatsuki. Quote, yeah, but we'd need facilities, right? Someplace to keep our ninja stuff, a training room, somewhere to meet. A group should be together, or it's not much of one. I guess here's a good place. He had a point. No such accommodations had been necessary before because all Akatsuki members were already elite ninjas by the time they joined, but these ones would all have to train together. She would not have to, of course. Not in the same way. Konan continued to studiously stare outside, away from them as she replied, sound reasoning. I'll mention it to anyone else who comes out this way. The pair looked back at each other, unsure, before deciding the best course of action was to leave. As they walked out to their car, Nagato started to turn the possibilities over in his head. He wouldn't have described anyone else in that room as bad looking, exactly, few of them were even kind of feminine looking, though, so that did limit his options, and that's if anyone was available, Yahiko a. Sked what he was smiling about as they faced each over the car's roof. Nagato paid it off as just realizing how powerful Konan had implied his original to be. He continued to smile in secret all the way back. Sasori got impatient after a couple minutes and asked Deidara, are you going to stand here or are we gonna get moving? Deidara broke out into a grin and rushed from the room, trusting Sasori to come of his own accord this time. By the time he was within earshot, Deidara was already showing his palms to Konan, he never did that to anybody, not even Sasori, and asking about them. Konan replied that she had no idea where those came from, but they were not completely unique in her world and barely out of the ordinary in the Atsuki. Deidara pulled his hands back with an excited grin that turned into a pained look of indecision as he tried to ask what he so strongly wanted to ask but couldn't figure out how. Sasori put a hand on his shoulder and pulled him away, murmuring gently, bug her later, brat. Neither noticed the grimace that crossed Konan's face before she explained to them Yahiko's reasons for taking this building as a base of operations. Itachi and Kisame watched the door swing shut before making their presences known. Tacitly, they agreed to not talk about their current activity until such time as it seemed normal. Konan made a comment about Itachi's eyes suggesting he should investigate them sometime, and asked Kisame if he did have Samahata in this world. Kisame didn't want to give her too much information yet, so he only replied, yes. She made sure to mention he could bring Samahata whenever he felt comfortable doing so, which was very courteous. Kisame allowed her to see his back fully turned as he left, wondering about how his first experience living with people not his parents would turn out. He wouldn't have agreed if not for having seen that there were enough rooms for everyone to sleep alone. Finally, Kakuzu emerged. He just stared at her, narrowed his eyes, grumbled and shook his head as if he couldn't believe what he was getting in. 2. With a sigh, he asked her to please make sure Hidan didn't get any caffeine or sugar. She sensed he was not in the mood to hear her speak anymore, so she didn't. With everyone gone, the building was quiet. She wondered if Nagato and Yahiko felt this quiet, across the uncrossable space. She continued to sit there on the desk for some time after everyone had left. The lobby was dark, only her flower shone in the faint moonlight. It felt better to sit there unseen while she wondered what to do. Why am I here? The question was unavoidable. There was physical evidence that the ninjas she knew were not actually the ninjas she had known. So why was she there? Konan saw, in her mind's eye, another woman, like herself but not the same person, laughing with the strangers that called themselves Nagato and Yahiko as she had done in another world. That woman could have been perfectly happy with them, they could have all been complete. That woman would not have her terrible memories, would belong here. A terrible thought occurred to her. I exist, and she doesn't. Did I do something to keep another me from existing, to keep them from having her in their lives? Is it my fault somehow that Nagato doesn't have a sister, and Yahiko's still probably single? Did I do something to steal a chance at a second life for myself when I didn't deserve it? Would they have been happier with a me that fit with them? If what she had seen of Nagato's interactions with Yahiko before was any indication, the answer was yes. Perhaps there was a reason she had been saved back then. Actually seeing them alone together, just her two lifelong companions without her, seemed unbalanced. If I wasn't here, they could have had a suitable me to balance them. Konan wondered how the afterlife was, if there was any need for balance in heaven. Do my Nagato and Yahiko miss me? Did I do something to run away from them? Are they angry or disappointed? Konan shook her head, trying to dispel these thoughts. No, it's no use to think of what might have been. If I'm to prove competent enough to lead a new Akatsuki, I must look to the future, to what is and could be. So, there must be a reason I exist. Something that is here only because I am, that nothing and no one else could do. Was I brought over to this world with the intention that I would form a new Akatsuki? Is that my reason for existing? The idea was absurd. How could anything with the capacity to do this possibly care about something so small as a few humans? No. Perhaps it's more general than that. A subject of one world, in another. The yin in the yang. A bridge. Her death flashed before her eyes. Do I exist because of what I promised Toby, that I would be that bridge? A decision appeared. To accept, or not to accept. Half of it was missing a leg to stand on, so it fell over and disappeared. There's no reason not to accept that as my reason for being here. I suppose they would have just reinvented the techniques of my world anyway. It is so, then. I am here to bridge the gap between my world and this one. I know that I am, because I decided I was. Who's going to tell me otherwise? Not anyone I'd know well enough to listen to. Her fingers tightened and she hissed at the casual reference to the fact that everyone she knew and loved or at least cared about in the slightest was dead. Even Hidan. Especially Hidan. Before she even knew it, Konan had thrown herself off her perch and was moving at quick speed down the hallways. The building. Her legs propelled themselves, and the mechanisms of her mind swung away from everything she'd just been thinking about. It was a common reflex hammered into every ninja during missions. She immediately classified this as a reconnaissance mission and focused all her attention on the task of learning more about the building. First, the layout. The front lobby and its side rooms took up the entire front of the lower floor, and had two hallways leading from it on either side parallel to each other. The hallway they'd all used to access the kitchen through the propped open door was the hallway to the right, as one faced into the lobby from the front door. Konan moved down that hallway quickly, turned into the kitchen, crossed it, went through the other doorway, found herself in an adjoining room with nothing in it except a power outlet low to the floor on the left, turned right through a snugly fitted set of doors to exit that room, and found herself in a hallway. Turning to her right, she walked around the corner and found the kitchen's doorway. She turned back and crossed the hallway entirely, turning left when it ended, and the lobby reappeared. So, the lobby and the cross hallway appeared to form a rectangle, with the kitchen and small room going through the intervening space. On each side of this rectangle she'd seen one room, seemingly not used for guests. The guest rooms were probably the ones beginning at the two far corners of the rectangle and continuing down the building. She went back down the left hallway, noting several rooms on this side. It was long and ended abruptly, turning right into another cross hallway. In the middle of this one stood a set of stairs, and behind the stairs a back door leading onto a small stoop covered with bird poop. She continued through the cross hallway until reaching the other side, which had instead of a room at the very end a sunken stairway leading down to the left. Konan was intrigued and descended, finding a small door at the bottom in the left side of the wall. She opened it to discover a large open space. The ceiling was low, but the area was vast and obviously took up the entire space underneath the cross hallway. The floor was metal. Konan dismissed the obvious thought immediately. The room had probably been used for storage once and could be used as such again. There was no reason to have to torture anyone in this world anyway. Well, as far as she knew there wasn't, not yet. It would be really easy to clean in a pinch. Being right beneath the rest of the building would pose a problem, but as she looked around the soundproofing possibilities began to appear before her eyes. Konan shook her head, cleared these thoughts away for later, and returned to the ground floor. Again she traced her steps in the direction of the front of the building. It seemed to appear after only a few steps in that direction. Every other room had been neatly closed or at most just open enough to peek into. This one was wide open, which Konan saw as she approached by the amount of light spilling into the hallway from it. This amount wavered a little as the door moved back and forth in the air, movements coming from the open window. Konan stopped, looked and listened all around, sensing nothing. There was nothing outside the window but the forest. The forest, she recalled Hidan racing out of the room just behind her, turning in this direction. She moved inside and reached out for the window. Just before she could, it occurred to her to wonder why she would close the window. Her hand tightened around the window's handle, prepared to pull it down at the slightest sound of movement. Again she wondered why. He did not pose a threat to her. My Hidan wouldn't. But who is this guy? Even so, she could not really believe he was any danger to her rational self. I couldn't tell any difference before. She left, leaving the window gaping open behind her. This hallway led back to the kitchen door and the lobby, as expected. A giant rectangle with a line splitting it in two across the middle. There was an upper floor, but the reconnaissance mission was over. She wandered into the kitchen and sat on top of the little counters, spent. Today had been too full. She felt almost as drained as she had after Yahiko died, but a different kind of drained. That had been overbearing loss. This was every kind of feeling mixed together. The happiness, the sadness, the sudden loss. It only made her slightly nauseous to wonder whether it really mattered that they weren't the people she knew, as long as they worked well enough as replacements. Of course it was obvious the answer was yes, but she turned it over in her head slowly anyway. Konan knew in a detached kind of way that she would wake up in the morning in hell. Some slight disgust ped through her as she felt herself shrink away from the thought of seeing them again. What the hell was that about? Yes, it hurt to think of them, especially the ones that looked just like her two most treasured people in the entire world. But she was a warrior. She'd seen Yahiko die once already. How could seeing him alive possibly feel so bad that she'd shrink away from it? Actually, Nothing about what she felt upon seeing him alive made any sense. Even before, when she'd thought he was her Yahiko, it had felt bad. Konan thought about the scene at the park. She hadn't been able to look at him. Even now, she tried to picture his face, and couldn't. Her mind flinched away from that image. With a sinking heart, she realized she could not look at him and would not be able to do so anytime soon. Why? She loved him. It didn't make any sense. She considered her options. Even if she in no way had the energy to sort out her feelings tonight, her first instinct was to come up with a plan to do so. No matter what she felt, it was her duty as a shinobi to do what she'd promised and train them. She couldn't do that without looking at them. The thought of being in such close quarters, training together again, made her twitch. Konan groaned under her breath. I can't do this. I'm trying to make a plan to solve a problem that is itself disrupting my ability to plan and, I suspect, is immune to rational thought. I can't do this. I don't have the slightest clue how. Yes, she was aware such thinking would lower her chances further. No, she didn't give two damns about that at this time. Frustration seethed under her skin. While the burst of angry motivation was just starting to make its way through her arteries, the moon continued to shine softly on the forest, bathing everything in its silver glow. The winds moved slowly, almost wrapping themselves around the living things in the woods like a hug. Hidan raced along, moving as silently as he could, surging through the night. He did not have the breath to waste purring, but he was certainly in the mood for doing so. Some funny thoughts were racing through his head, but funny in a kind of good way. Home, family, maybe, the future. Hidan wondered if he'd ever had any of those things. Of course he must have had a home and family at some point. As he ran alongside the wall and carefully oriented himself so the blades on his back wouldn't catch the side of the window, Hidan wondered if his parents looked like him and would recognize him if they could see him now. Easily, he hopped into the air, twisted just the right amount, and threw his arms under and behind him to propel himself forward. That part was easy. The hard part was the landing. Certain muscles pushed as he crossed through the window to swing his body to the side. As his body failed to turn enough, Hidan panicked and pulled his legs forward just in time to land on the very front of his feet and continue falling forward. His arms were more accurate in their timing, so he landed hard on his forearms and continued forward, stopping only when he reached out with his left hand and pushed back against the floor in front of him. His nose was mere inches from the carpeted floor. Hidan whined despite there being nobody to hear his complaint, and pushed himself off the ground. No matter how much he practiced these movements, his instincts always accounted for a tail he didn't have. He continued to grouse before it occurred to him that maybe his scythe could help with that. He stopped brushing off immediately and popped out of the room, purring eagerly. The purr changed to a thick rumble, then died as his steps slowed. Leaving the room and entering the hallway, the tracks of Conan's path just a few minutes prior lingered. Hidan found himself reflexively reaching for the handle of his favorite weapon, pulling it closer, as if that would soothe anything. His other hand curled, and he came up with a really good idea for one of the training rooms on the spot. But this time, the suddenness of this feeling left no doubt. Hidan shook his head, pushed it away. When stuff came up out of nowhere like this with no obvious cause, it was definitely someone else's feelings. He remembered the look on Conan's face, the sudden change in the air as she told them they looked like all her dead friends, and felt very stupid. Following the trail, he raced to the front of the building. The lobby was in darkness, as it had been ever since she first raced out of the room and left them to their thoughts. Hidan would have preferred the warm light of the sun himself, but at this moment he understood perfectly her perspective. The darkness was better for being alone. He slowly, carefully stepped out onto the lobby floor and made his way to the desk she was standing in front of. He stopped a little behind and to her left, and considered what to say. Even for someone like him, this was still a guessing game. He tried his best to see how her feelings felt, but the only things they left him wanting was a room full of punching bags to beat mercilessly. A shiver shimmered up his spine, and something seemed to slip. A feeling of panic that was all his own rushed through Hidan's veins. He recognized this vague sense of being off-kilter, unstable. It was a terribly dangerous thing to be, and everyone he'd ever felt it from had had an uncontrollable situation that someone always had to step into control. Family if they were lucky, cops if they were less lucky, a judge ordering them to a psychiatric stay if they were super in over their heads. Sometimes, in the best of cases, it had been him. The desire not to let her be alone took him, and Hidan understood exactly what he needed to do. Want a hug? Konan felt something twist inside. Her first thought was that no way in hell could she do that. Touching him, wrapping her arms around him, letting him hold her in a close manner, something in that felt like it would be wrong somehow. He's not my Hidan. He's another person who just happens to look and sound a lot like him. He's like my Hidan's twin brother. I can't just skip from man to man like that, as if he was interchangeable. Hidan is just like Yahiko in how unique he is. That would be betrayal. No, it wouldn't. He'd understand perfectly if he was able to. Actually, this difference in semantics was her rational mind speaking. Konan, after running through a great deal of thought, realized that she was going about this entirely the wrong way. Her rational mind was entirely helpless. It was no good to appeal to it. For now, as long as it felt like betrayal, it was. I've never thought of it like that. I've never decided my own reality like that. I don't know how to think in this way. Fortunately, someone did, and he was standing right there waiting for her. Konan turned and looked him in the eyes. He looked faintly worried at first glance, but grinned before she finished turning. He wondered how much directness she was used to, then decided, screw it. He was a direct person, she'd have had to get used to that before, so onward. He reached out his arms and held them there, an invitation to step into them should she decide yes. Konan hesitated. It still seemed wrong. But looking in his eyes, there appeared nothing but a desire to make her feel better. Why is that look there? Sometimes, when I've done something for him, Hidan has offered I stance in return because he sees me as being like himself. But this Hidan is nothing like me. Why? She had no idea. All she knew was that stepping into his arms right now would be something very significant. A show of trust. Did she trust him? Hidan's arms were starting to feel it after a couple seconds being held out like that. He knew he'd feel so much worse, maybe up to triple Terry bad levels even, if he left himself and her to such feelings. He didn't have the slightest clue what he was defending himself from, except that it was awful, and a hug helped with awful feelings no matter what they were, right? So he kept his arms up despite their burning. Konan wondered how long he was going to keep this up, and why. Then she realized she was very stupid. He trusts me. He's inherently unreasonable enough to do that. My whole plan depended on him trusting me. Why did it take me so long to think of that? Such faith couldn't go unrepaid. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The world dropped out from under her. As soon as her fingers made skin-to-skin contact, she felt it. Without any knowledge or feeling, her knees went limp and he held her up. Konan's perception was far away from such small concerns. Her perception was that the world had turned liquid, no, more insubstantial than liquid, and was now in action everywhere, and she was in serious danger of being swallowed up and dissolved. With no small horror and amazement, she realized Hidan was hollow. Since first contact, his skin and muscle, all that seemed solid in him, had first become as thin as the membrane surrounding an apple, then disappeared entirely. All she could perceive now was that she was in contact with a portion of the liquid reality that hurt, and was on the edge of falling into it. Suspended over the abyss, she could imagine her entire being separated into its constituent motes never to be reunited again, and said Bei-ing became almost entirely composed of fear. Almost. Even as she feared falling in, she knew she could not. Somehow, Though she couldn't feel it, Conan's being was still attached to her body somewhere, and her body could not pee through Hidan's. Her being could not truly merge with this substance of reality. This inability was not absolute, however. Some things can escape beyond a single person's being even while confined to a physical body. Parts of one's personality and identity cannot, but emotions easily can. So it was that before her perception, the substance of reality that she could only barely stay separate from reclaimed the parts of itself that were in her. The pain of loss, of deprivation, that dull ache that pounded through her entire body and fatigued her was first transmuted, then withdrawn. From a dull ache which tired her and felt uneven and dirty, it became a sharp flash of stabbing, cutting pain, a clean form of pain that drew all impurities out and filled her with energy. The only impurities it drew out this time were itself, the impossible deep blue that was not blue, it was every other color at once actually, but mostly blue. Most of the colors it consisted of she had no possible name for. All she could name was a deep bluish color that felt like stabbing and splitting and falling, and had once made her feel afraid. As soon as the pain was purified, she had stopped feeling fear. Now it seemed, above all else, clean. She wanted to fall into it, become precise, defined and clean like it was. Still her body held her back. It was awful, terribly awful. Tears filled her eyes, and her arms tightened around Hidan's broad shoulders. Hidan's arms tightened too, but his eyes stayed unfocused straight ahead. He had felt the fear, of course, as well as the what? Something sinking down, incorporated and washed away into him. He wondered what that feeling had been. The feeling that, what? Had something important happened? She'd been afraid, he remembered. Had anything else happened? No, nothing that was in his recollection. No other feelings. He smiled and rubbed her back comfortingly, wondering what she'd been afraid of. It withdrew. The pain that filled all of reality, that gave life, that made things right that were wrong, it hid itself again. Konan was able to wrestle her emotions back under control, and found herself pressed up against Hidan's muscular shoulder while he rubbed circles in her back. Rubbing circles like that seemed so Hidan somehow, so much like the I heard upset people like this, let's try it out form she'd always imagined any attempt of his to be kind would take. It was utterly soothing, and intolerable. But this time, even though it was for the same reason, it being intolerable didn't hurt in the same terrible way. She marveled at this as she stepped back. Hidan melted with relief, and almost fell forward as the burden was lifted from his shoulders. Now that he didn't have to use his energy to keep her feelings from overwhelming him, his eyelids began to send signals warning him of what time it was. It was really too bad. He would have liked to nuzzle her more, watch her smile like she was now for a while, but he actually did have questions to be asked. With a sigh, he reached back and grabbed the scythe, stepping back to sit on the desk as he did so in order to lay it across his lap. Konan stayed where she was, looking at him intently and with no desire to turn away. I have some questions about everything, he said. This was no surprise, and Konan waited patiently for him to settle on what to ask first. Where did this thing come from? Konan blinked in surprise. Then it dawned on her that of course, after what Hidan had said earlier, it followed that he would be most interested in his original's past. The one group of topics she didn't know anything about. I don't know. Perhaps I should warn you, the original Akatsuki was not a group of friends, as you seem to be. I knew them only as far as I worked with them. I would have liked to know your original more, but fraternizing that much would have been highly unusual and suspicious, so I did not. I can't tell you anything of his past. Hidan had looked at her expectantly while she answered as if he had a list organized and ready to run through, a guess confirm. By the way he muttered, oh, crap, and furrowed his eyebrows. After only a few seconds, he got a lightbulb expression on his face and asked, but wait, that means you know how he fought and stuff, right? His techniques. What kind of cool ninja shit did he do? Oh. This poor guy, her face slipped and revealed the oncoming disappointment. Hidan's expression changed from eager lightbulb to ha as he looked. Konan rearranged her face quickly and proceeded. I'm sorry, but not a lot. There were only two notable characteristics of your original. The first was his immortality. He could take any amount of damage that didn't destroy his body on the cellular level and survive it. Given how he didn't bother defending himself most of the time, I believe he healed more efficiently and faster to compensate. As far as actual techniques, though, he only had one that I know of. Hidan's eyes were doing something strange. They were widening in an odd way that made her feel very, very bad for telling him this. His lips joined the act, too, and Konan fought not to cringe. The reason your scythe has 3 blades is to increase its attack span. It's not meant to kill the enemy itself, although it can easily do that if you hit the right place, but your original only used it to gather blood from the enemy. He had a ritual, used in battle as part of his religion. It was some kind of human sacrifice ritual, and he considered it disrespectful to his god not to use it, so that was the only technique he fought with. He had to get some of the enemy's blood, stab himself and draw a design on the ground with his own blood. When he ingested the enemy's blood and stood in the design, his body would change color to show it was connected with the enemy's body. As long as he stood in the design, anything that was inflicted on him would be inflicted on his target as well. Konan paused to catch a breath and gauge Hidan's reaction, which had paused at the stage it was at before. His eyes changed slightly, keeping their unusual guilt-tripping qualities but with a look of added bewilderment in them, like she was doing something to him and he couldn't understand what he had done to deserve it. She was used to taking care of minor nuisances Nagato did not wish to bring out another path for, but something in this particular man's expression touched her in a way screams had not for some time. Her voice softened to a near whisper for the final devastating news. I'm afraid, the limitations are as bad as they sound. Konan swallowed. This only worked as long as he stayed in the circle, which meant that his greatest physical attribute, his mobility, was rendered useless. In the time it took to draw the circle and stab himself fatally, an enemy could easily force him out of it. The technique either only worked on one enemy at a time, or he simply never bothered to use it on more than one, but either way only one target could be killed using this technique. If he wanted to kill more than one, it would require leaving, fighting to get more blood, and returning to the circle all over again. He had to have backup for every battle if there was a chance of there being more than one enemy, and the technique would fail if an enemy got the chance to see it in live. Backup is the only reason he survived using such a technique, because his immortality could easily be defeated by an enemy forcing him out of the circle and immobilizing him, such as by cutting off his head. In fact, that's how he died. He wasn't supposed to ever die. The shock from months ago came over her, and Konan was rendered speechless once again. No, the possibility that he could be immobilized is right there, easily deducible, plain as day. The idea that he couldn't was one that I should never have entertained. I was stupid, blinded by lust and whatever kind of connection I may have begun to think we had. Just because a man is handsome, has the protection and guidance of a literal god, and seems more than normal doesn't mean the universe is obligated to protect him. There's no special armor awarded to those who are special. I must never forget that again. I'm not sure how I did forget that, again. She bowed her head in an instinctive show of respect to the dead, regardless if they could see her or not. His abilities also included the standard ones that every shinobi learns from their general education, the ability to handle ninja tools, kunai, and shuriken, some moderate skill in hand-to-hand combat, some low-level jutsus. If you have inherited any capacity to be a shinobi, you should have those skills as muscle memory. Once more she faced him, looked into his eyes. Any questions? Hidan stared back, the guilt trip gone but the bewilderment remaining. Slowly he blinked, and looked down. His mouth moved as he considered what to say. His hands tightened around the stem of the scythe just below its lowest blade, and he lifted it, held the blades in front of his face. So, this is all I have. Konan reminded him softly, and the ritual, and immortality. Hidan shook his head. Immortality, yeah, but no battle techniques. No actual impressive unique things, except something I can't use. I can get stabbed, and I can use a slightly different weapon slightly better than some Rondo could. That's all I get from my original, that ing bastard. Konan frowned. The ritual isn't completely unusable. Quote. Hidan looked up sharply at her. Yeah, it ing well is. It's a thing that requires me to be there close to the person I'd use it on, gives them enough time and enough warning of how totally screwed they are to let all the dread and fear and shit settle in, and makes me feel the same as they feel. That is completely and utterly, totally unusable. I'd drive myself insane if I used that. I couldn't use it for anything except killing someone, so every time I used it I'd have to feel all the fear and pain of dying. Yeah, I don't like feeling that shit. I can't use it at all. It'd make me lose my mind. How in the could? He continued on in an almost uninterrupted string of curses for some time, but Konan stopped paying attention and continued to process the beginning of what he'd said. He does feel the pain, but he enjoys that usually because he's a masochist. But he mentioned fear as well. The ritual doesn't make Hidan feel the same emotions as his victims. He's never described feeling fear before. I didn't say anything to imply it did, I only said his body would become linked to their body. I only described physical linkage. Why on earth would he think? Hidan, she interrupted. He looked up with an angry look on his face, presumably at his unhelpful bastard of an original. Konan stared at him and found the inner blaze surging of its own accord behind her eyes as she focused intently. The look dropped and his mouth fell open a little, but all she was focused on was his eyes. His eyes near instantly met the focus of a predator, even as they widened in awe. The result was a combination of both. The space between them seemed to vibrate as they both looked with intense focus at each other, and only each other. This time, there was no other business to get in the way. Hidan, how did you know my intentions were trustworthy? She demanded. For someone else, he might not have, but for her he obeyed. You felt trustworthy. With you there, I didn't feel any mocking like, hee, suckers, I didn't feel any anger or desire to hurt, I didn't feel anything except closeness. If you had been untrustworthy, you would have brought in trustworthy feelings and shit with you. I didn't. So, I knew you were okay. The intense focus and burning disappeared from Konan's eyes as she retreated into her own thoughts, though she continued to look into him. Itachi. Hidan lowered his gaze and started scratching his head, feeling suddenly sheepish. They're different people, not the people I knew. Hidan stopped scratching and looked up. The space between them that had seemed so close before now seemed like a cold, uncrossable void. Hidan's arms prickled with goosebumps. But, didn't they seem to have the same abilities? Why? Konan returned to the room, which now seemed much more empty than it was before. She could feel the empty space around them, somehow, as well as the silence. Hidan looked at her, looking just as confused as she was. But he wouldn't he? The exact words Itachi had used before came back, and she did something she'd never done before. She blushed and facepalmed. Hidan felt the ripple of an urge to laugh pee through him, then it was gone. Konan lowered her hand to her side, and the very slight redness she had been able to allow to her cheeks disappeared. My apologies. Immortality was the only special ability he had, but like everyone else my Hidan had some quirks. One of those was unusually accurate perception. He could see things in other people that were not immediately obvious, almost at a glance. He saw some things I'd rather not mention in me, and sometimes made comments about Kakuzu or others that seemed reasonably true, but only if you had certain information that he was never given. She peered closer at the version of Hidan sitting before her. Unlike you, however, this only worked if he was bothering to pay attention or whatever he saw was interesting enough to grab him. The range of things he could perceive was limited, as well. Kakuzu found it very helpful how often he might be asked to take a close look at an enemy and deduce not Hing more specific than, what the is wrong with that guy? Or something similarly unhelpful. A great many things he couldn't see, couldn't identify in specific language, or ignored as unimportant. And all he did was see things in other people, not feel them as you claim to. I'm intrigued now about what has happened to change you. As well as why you have to be so different from my Hidan, and who the hell are you, and is anybody else also different from their originals? Let's not forget I might just have to throw out all my conclusions about this world and guess all of again, and most of my privacy will have to go in the trash as well. Hidan was feeling very grumpy. He could be quite sure that wasn't anything he was picking up from her, because she didn't look at all grumpy, and she also wasn't the target of vague disappointing vibes, didn't seem tired. And wasn't acting like she felt at all uncomfortable. Not to mention that he had no idea how to feel about the idea that at least part of his having to be constantly swayed in various directions by other people might be because of his stupid original, and even if future him decided that was a good tea. His original would still be a jack. Alright, it was time to shut business down for the day and hit the carpet. He sighed, sat up, and grumpily asked, "Can I use this thing as a substitute tail?" Konan followed his gesture to the red scythe in his lap. "You may try and tell me if it works." "Cool beans. Let's make a deal. Since I could feel you earlier having all kinds of problems with all your friends being dead and all, let's shake on it. Let's shake on us being, like, new friends for ya. We're new people, so that makes us new friends. Would that be good?" he asked, holding out a hand. Konan looked at his hand and thought of Yahiko's smile. "I will not be able to hold up my end of that bargain. Sigh, you'll have to get used to us eventually. I wonder how long it'll take me to get used to having no privacy whatsoever. Nagato didn't use his jutsu to monitor all my activities, after all. She still did not think it would be possible to not think of her versions of them, and said as much." Hidan said nothing, just stared back with visible effort taken to keep his eyelids open, until she relented. Even while tired, his hand closed firmly around hers, promising. "That room with the carpet and the huge window that I used earlier looks good. I'll probably sleep in after all this staying up past my bedtime, so if Kakuzu asks you can tell him where to avoid going. Yawn, happy dream hunting." Konan smiled, and it took no effort. "To you as well." Hidan hopped off the desk, gave her a thumbs up, and turned in the direction of his room. Konan realized she was very glad he'd decided to go to bed, and selected her own room in her mind. She did not feel remotely as tense and uncomfortable as before. It seemed like she would get a good night's sleep. Knowing he would be able to hear her, she followed Hidan's scythe-laden back as he left the room. "Thank you." Hidan dug and dug, throwing all kinds of objects out to his sides. Pieces of paper, fabric, old dolls, trucks, a basketball, a hat, 2 buckets, and a bedsheet all went flying. The small chest he was kneeling in front of was notorious for this sort of behavior. "Come on already, it's her birthday. What do you want? What is it? I'll do it, please," he asked. When he next reached into the chest, there was a hidden space. Leaning all the way over, Hidan's fingers just brushed a corner of the object he was searching for and he gasped, but his fingers inadvertently pushed it deeper. He stretched out his legs and reached even further into the chest, trying to reach. In this position he was leaning down into it with only one arm holding him up, so when his hand lost its grip there was nothing else to hold him. He flailed his arms, trying to keep a grip on the precious treasure, but it was useless. His arms only hit the side of the wall, throwing him away from it. He landed flat on his stomach in a small, dark cavern. In the last light just before all illumination disappeared, he saw the precious object bounce into a small, shadowy corner. It was urgent that he get it in time, urgent. His arms flailed all around, trying to get a grip to push himself off the ground, but he couldn't do it. His arms slid off the ground uselessly, hit what few handholds there were at all the wrong angles. Desperately Hidan tried to crawl across the ground towards it. He screamed, growled, roared, anything to keep the growing sound of scurrying away from it. His efforts were useless. No sound he made had any effect, and as the sound of it brushing against the floor disappeared, Hidan whimpered and started to cry silently. He would never be able to get it in time for her. It had bounced away, beyond his reach. Now she would be too. Just then his nails found purchase. It was water. He stabbed his fingers into the liquid surface, dragged himself forward until he could stand. A sound of rhythmic splashing came from the far side where the water issued from. He staggered forward, the water slipping from under him, dragging himself back to his feet the first few times but settling for a crawl the last half of the way. His left eye was nearly smashed near the bridge of his nose by some blunt object. He reached up and grasped the stem of his scythe. His grip faltered as he nearly blacked out from lack of air, but he gagged out the current mouthful of air and dragged in another by sheer willpower and pulled. Nothing. He tried to get up and pull it in various directions. It would barely tilt in response to his moving from side to side, but nothing else. The two longer blades rotated anxiously, splashing in the water. Their younger sibling was trapped, caught in a rock. It would not pull free. Hidan crawled up to the three blades and whispered his apologies to the two spinning ones, then pulled up. There was an agonized sound, and Hidan wept as he feared his apologies for destroying the smallest blade would prove necessary. The rock refused to let go, but the other two blades were able to reach it as the scythe tilted. They cut into the stone, stabbing deep, like two pinpricks in the sensitive tissue of a giant. As they moved back and forth through the material of the cave, it gave way, heaving away from these stabbing, needling objects. The young blade broke free as the rock split, and Hidan's hands slipped down the neck of the scythe as it pitched forward. He grabbed it again at the base of the stem where his eye had nearly bled, and pleaded for his life as the first of the sharp stones stabbed upward into his tailbone in a fireworks explosion of agony. For the first time ever, his pleading found reception, and he kept a grip of the scythe as his face was rubbed bleeding and nearly ground to paste through being pushed through the dirt and stones. He tilted upwards, and gained a bird's-eye view of the countryside below, separated into neat little geometric shapes of different color, with no other details visible from this height. There was another agonized sound which cut off very quickly, and Hidan looked and saw the topmost blade wedged between two boulders. The boulders were themselves struggling to burst free from their kin, and this position could not be held for long. Just then a flash of white briefly appeared against the mountain below. Hidan struggled to catch more than a vague sense of motion against the white clouds before the scythe slipped. As he jerked forward and almost fell, the vague sense of motion resolved itself into a seagull. It carried against its matted breast a red frog, limply dangling and at risk of falling. Hidan's anger boiled over, and he threw his body into convulsions, swinging himself back and forth, until with a roar he let go and launched himself down at the bird. It whirled away, but his hands lashed out, grasping for the air, pulling him nearer through sheer force of desperation and fear until he grabbed securely the bird's left leg. It shrieked and dipped, and Hidan's guts were rearranged in their cavity while it fell. He held on, for above all it must not fall, the precious gift for. The scythe touched his side gently, leaving a trail of coolness in its wake. Hidan reached his left hand for the seagull's leg, but it wouldn't move. Nothing would. His eyes opened wide, and a field of colored clumps came into view. Was he low enough to see the individual trees? No, it was carpet. His left hand wouldn't move because he was trying to push it through a movable floor, turning himself onto his right side as he did so. The stem of the scythe met the floor and was pushed up, forcing the blades back again over the trail of coolness as they moved more to the center of his back. His right arm was somehow both tense and completely asleep, so he just fumbled it into position and leaned on it to look around. Kakuzu sat on the bed, watching and patiently waiting. Hidan met his gaze and stared back. Kakuzu blinked and looked at his phone, not interested in a wake-up game. The bright lighting shining off the leaves of the distant trees outside told Hidan all he needed to know about why Kakuzu grumbled his breath as he looked. The older man put his phone away and looked down at Hidan again. How does that thing stay on your back? He inquired, raising an eyebrow. Hidan was a little mad from the sudden wake-up. What thing? He retorted. The scythe rested against his back, no longer cool but warm to match the rest of his body. Kakuzu figured he had time for pointing out the obvious later. Never mind. Let's go. It's after 10. Hidan's unhappiness disappeared into a puff of smoke at that number. Hey, I got some nice long sleep then. He got up off the carpet, brushed his arms off in case there was any dirt, and followed Kakuzu out the door. They met Konan in the kitchen. Something about the way her eyes changed when she glanced at him told Hidan her dreams had not been of the calm and fluffy sort. He didn't pick up any painful or angry sensations though, so he figured she was okay. Most of her attention stayed on Kakuzu, for he was the one in doubt. What have you decided?